So, you're probably wondering, okay, I don't know what I titled this video, so I can't really say what you're probably wondering, but, Five Nights at Freddy's, it has a look, and, it's a look that a lot of people don't really define very well, or, heck, even notice, and I want to change that. Everybody knows the first FNAF game has phenomenal atmosphere, just like all around. I don't even need to really explain why. I mean, just look at this. It perfectly okay, I'm gonna explain why later, but right now we're just gonna look at it here. It looks good, right? It looks nice. Good atmosphere for a horror game. It looks very spooky. Looks very haunted. Very good job. But I feel like there's a few layers to this that a lot of people don't really actually notice. And to get into those layers, we're going to have to take a very, very close look at Scott Cawthon. Not that close, but you know, you get the idea. So basically everybody at this point knows what Scott made before FNAF that led to FNAF. You know, Chipper & Sons Lumber Co. It received criticism for its ugly characters and that looked like creepy animatronics, which was the inspiration behind why FNAF 1 even exists. But Chipper & Sons isn't really where I'd say the origin of FNAF's art style comes from. And the first game he made that actually used this aesthetic to its advantage was a game called The Desolate Hope, which I'm sure most of you have probably heard about at this point. Scott Cawthon is a weird dude, and all of his 3D games have this weird, like, insistence on using this crusty, like, early 2000s CGI vibe, and as much as it is crusty, it has a very weird, creepy, nostalgic feeling on basically all of his work. And I don't think any of his games demonstrate this quite as well as The Desolate Hope does. And as the name implies, the game takes place mostly in these very desolate, creepy places that are very, like, obviously, like, abandoned and everything, and it's just a vibe. It works wonders for the game, and I honestly think that the outdated CGI is actually something that makes this game stronger in its visuals. It makes it look like something that's distinctly stuck in the past, which would later on very much help FNAF. One thing I find funny about this game is that it actually basically has the exact same art style of FNAF, like down to a T. Like, some of these environments look straight out of Sister Location. Like, that is literally Scrap Baby's claw. Some of this game's environments are, like, seriously insane looking. Scott just has a very iconic modeling and texturing style that I can't really find anywhere else unless it's intentionally trying to replicate his art style specifically. Something about his work just has this vibe to it. But back to where we started, Chipper & Sons. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call this game ugly looking, I'd more say dated looking. It's more like a high-res Donkey Kong Country vibe. It just kinda looks like it released 10 years before it did. The pre-rendered graphics in this game just scream 90s, and, you know, Desolate Hope does too, but Chipper & Sons doesn't really get the vibe as much. And in terms of where the animatronic criticism came from, you can very much tell. Like, let's just take Chipper and put him next to Chuck E. Cheese. You could see the connections there. Now, after this game got honestly undeservingly slammed so hard, Scott took the criticism that his characters look creepy and decided to use that to make a horror game. Everybody knows this. Why am I explaining it? Because it's very important to why FNAF 1 worked in the first place. It was coming from an artist who was ridiculed for his art being stuck in the past, and now he's making a horror game that is basically putting you up against the past. With a bunch of these old, decrepit animatronics in this old, decrepit, stinky pizzeria. And now we move on to what is undoubtedly the most obscure horror game of all time. Yeah, not exactly some niche thing. Actually, quite the contrary. What made this series captivating enough to last for this long? Like, FNAF is gonna be 10 years old in 2 years. 10! That's double digits! And it's still just as relevant as it was when it first blew up back in 2014. Like, did you know that that FNAF peaked in popularity according to Google Trends when Security Breach released? Like, December 2021 and, like, January 2022 was, like, the most popular FNAF has ever been. 8 years into his lifespan. That's crazy. So, seeing all this resurgence in FNAF's popularity has really made me think about what made it blow up in the first place, and specifically what made it so captivating to me. Because, I mean, I've dedicated like a fair portion of my life to FNAF, so like, there's gotta be something there that I could trace back to. So I looked. And I honestly, genuinely think that FNAF's art style is something that is severely downplayed in terms of why it was successful. Because FNAF 1's art direction, I think that this has a lot more to do with FNAF's success than people give it credit for. People always talk about how it's spooky, which is very true, but I feel like it also had some effects that are kind of not directly apparent, but are also definitely there, which is mainly what I want to be talking about in this video. So yeah, chapter transition. Go, do it. So, growing up, my favorite movie was The Nightmare Before Christmas. So this aesthetic is honestly really weirdly similar to FNAF 1, at least to me it is. It might just be the muted colors and how, like, there's the black stains everywhere and everything. It just kind of has the same general vibe to me, at least. But I think this might be a big reason why I was so attached to FNAF at first. Because I loved gloomy stuff like this. But you know what I also loved? Charles Entertainment Cheese. So you combine those two aesthetics together, and you basically have me magnetized to it. So now, with all that being said, let's get into what makes FNAF 1 so smart with its visual style. So, to start off, the FNAF 1 pizzeria's, like, rundownness and, like, haunted factor is super exaggerated, to a point where it gives it probably one of the best executed atmospheres I've ever seen in a game before. And I know that sounds a little stupid, but I mean, I can think what I want to think, right? So Scott's like digital, like, CGI, cheap CGI style really benefits this game for giving it a very, very otherworldly and unnatural look. And the ambience definitely complements this. The place doesn't look dirty because it's actually dirty looking. It looks dirty because there's these, like, yeah, there's trash everywhere, obviously, but, like, it looks dirty because there's these weird black stains that are on almost every surface that, what substance is even that? What is that? And I think that was the black substance is specifically supposed to represent something paranormal, which obviously wasn't very developed in the first game, but I think that was always the intention of it. And obviously later on it was developed through the remnant and the agony and all that. But yeah, it's obviously supposed to be paranormal because there's literally Easter eggs in the game where Golden Freddy will write "It's me" on the walls in this same black substance. And now, while also demonstrated in the environment, I want to get into the animatronic designs and how they give it this sort of middle ground between realistic and cartoony. So, like, the first animatronic modeled, the endoskeleton, obviously. It wasn't, like, directly confirmed, but I mean, like, you kind of need the endoskeleton to model the other characters. So let's look at this endoskeleton. Do you think this was trying to be realistic? Like, genuinely, tell me. Do you think this guy had realism in mind? Comparing him to real-life endoskeletons, Comparing him to real-life endoskeletons, he's clearly very dumbed down in design, and he's not as, complicated or anything. And he's also just, much more obviously a cohesive robot. And then this also plays into the signature FNAF animatronic style, where as opposed to real animatronics, FNAF animatronics don't necessarily try to hide the fact that they're robots. They all have completely open joints, which is really just exaggerating the fact that they're animatronics. Which I don't mind, because, why try to hide it if showing it makes them creepier? It just makes them very obviously not organic, which I think helps FNAF a lot in terms of making it really achieve the nightmare scenario it's trying to replicate. Speaking of that nightmare scenario, we should probably get into that next. So let's go into basically the general, very, very generalized, not even going into the animatronic part, just what makes the scenario FNAF puts you in so scary, and why does the environment complement it so well? So I want you to imagine something. You're trapped in a big, empty warehouse with absolutely no signs of any other humans anywhere around you. You're low on light, and the light that you do have is running off of a flashlight that is running out of battery quickly. And accompanying you in this warehouse is a bunch of mannequins. And then you look away for a little while, and then one of them moves. Alright, so even if the jump scare thing didn't play out, you'd probably look like this image after seeing it moved. So you take this kind of concept, and then you apply it to nostalgia, with a dead, dark, washed-out children's pizzeria, and the mannequins replaced with animatronics. And to top off all that nostalgia, it's all rendered in the dated late 90s, early 2000s pre-rendered CGI that I'm sure all of us are familiar with from one point or another. And then the final flair to FNAF 1 that I think really gives it that haunted edge to it is also another example of Scott using limitations to his advantage. When the characters move in FNAF 1, you can't tell how they moved. They only walk between rooms when you're not looking at them. And they're never posed so you can get an idea of how they went in there. Their bodies are always just standing there, completely motionless. Which I think paired with the character models and the theme of the game and the art direction really ties everything together. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the rest of the series and how it evolves the style and builds off of it. So for FNAF 1, 2, and 3, I'd say they all basically stick to the same style, just with their own unique flares to them. So FNAF 2 goes for more of chaotic panic than eerie tension like the first game did. So to accommodate for this, the style obviously had to follow suit. So FNAF 2 is a lot more flashy and colorful than the first game. The cameras have more color, the animatronics are more lively, the office itself is super bright. The horror of the first game mostly comes from the atmosphere and the scenario you're in, but FNAF 2, it's more just about the gameplay and how panic-inducing it is. And I really don't mind this shift, it makes a lot of sense. Because while the pizzeria in FNAF 2 is just as haunted, it's not run down like the first game. This pizzeria literally just opened. And the weird unnatural things about it are still there, with all the black ghostly stains still being on the walls. So yeah, for FNAF 2's environment, there's not really too much to say, because most of the things about it basically are also things that apply to the first game, despite the things that I already mentioned that are different. So yeah, now let's get into the animatronics. So for the new updated, modern animatronics in FNAF 2, Scott opted to make them look like giant action figures, which, I mean, is a very strange decision, but it definitely worked out. Alright, maybe not for a horror context, because the toy animatronics really aren't scary at all. I mean, I guess Mangle is a little bit scary, but I don't know. Scott even changed all three of their designs when they come into the office just to make them scarier, with Toy Chica losing her beak, Toy Freddy's eyes going all black, and Toy Bonnie looking at you like this. Then of course you got Mangle, who isn't really scary in the fact that they're unnerving, more just the fact that, look, this thing could hurt me. This thing could hurt me. But I wouldn't really say that the fact that they aren't scary is an issue. Because not only does it make more sense, but it also makes them a perfect contrast to the other group of animatronics in this game. So the withered animatronics, as opposed to the FNAF 1 animatronics, go for a bit of a more realistic approach to animatronics. I said animatronics way too many times in that one sentence. Realistic in the sense that they look more realistic, not that they actually are more realistic. You know, because they still got those massive open joints. Then they got new things like the fur on the eyelids, the more complex endo design, and overall they're just a lot more detailed. And since these are the creepy dudes in the back room, they don't have to be believably things that they show to kids, which means that they can be a lot more scary. Like, Withered Chica is probably the scariest design in the series for me. The whole Withered gang is just a lot more exaggerated and detailed than the FNAF 1 gang, which serves their purpose in the game well, and they definitely add basically all of the horror that the game has. And then we got the puppet, which is the first FNAF character in the series at this point, which did not have joints and stuff. It's not an animatronic, this is a puppet. It's a puppet, whoa. So the puppet is definitely like a different style than the other characters, but it's in the same art style. It's just like, you know, obviously not a clunky robot like everyone else. But besides that, there's not really much I can really say about the puppet's design. It's just kinda, it's good. So yeah, FNAF 2, basically sticking to the same style, not really too much to go over, but still worth talking about. So now let's move on to FNAF 3. So FNAF 3's visual style is basically a lot more similar to FNAF 1, except they times it by 10 and also made everything tinted green. Now, a lot of people really don't like FNAF 3's style, and I can honestly see why, because it is a little hard to look at times. But since Fazbear's Fright as a setting is intentionally a horror attraction, it has the freedom to exaggerate stuff a lot more than the other games do. Remember those black stains I was talking about in the last two games? Well, they're the worst in Fazbear's Fright, and can you guess why? Good, take a wild guess. Go. Put in the comments below. This is interactive. Got your answer? Alright, let's go. The spooky black ghostly stains are the worst in Fazbear's Fright because it is a building that is infested with haunted objects. But yeah, since FNAF 3 takes place in a horror attraction, it obviously would look a lot more artificially scary, which it does. Your environment looks a lot less like a spooky animatronic is gonna jump out at you, and more like a scary zombie's gonna jump out at you. And I mean, if you want to be technical, both of those happen. Speaking of both of those happening, Springtrap. FNAF 3 has one antagonist, and it is Springtrap. And he is a torn-up green rabbit, and guess what the environment is? A torn-up green building. The environment FNAF 3 builds is specifically designed to make Springtrap hard to see in it. But that's enough about the environment, now let's actually talk about Springtrap. What do you mean I've already done that before? Springtrap is the first instance of a human model that we've seen in this entire series, and will be the only instance of it we've seen for a long time after this. I mean, at least until like 2017, which is... it was only 2 years later, what the hell? But anyway, look at this goofy Plants vs. Zombies looking dude. Springtrap's corpse basically just solidified in the series that it's not really realistic, it's not trying to be. Look at this dude. Goes to the body too, his body is just a bunch of noodles. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, because it really isn't, especially when we look at it later with the suit on, but like, it's just so funny looking. But his unrealisticness really does fall in line with the subtle lack of realism that the other two games had. And Springtrap's design masterfully hides this corpse, so it's hidden just enough to where it's not obvious, but not hidden enough to where you don't know something's up. I also like the fact that Springtrap has a lot more human-like proportions compared to the other characters. And they've got these holes in him that really don't make a lot of sense, but they really make him just look... I don't even know. He was just super unique at the time. Because previously, we had never seen a character that was this messed up. And despite being so messed up, he's still fully intact. Like, all his body parts are still there. He's just, like, messed up. I mean, I guess half of his ear is missing, but that's it. And one thing that's really cool about all FNAF 3's artistic choices is that they make it so even though FNAF 3 is the least positively received game in the main three, Springtrap still manages to be one of the most popular FNAF characters of all time. And Fazbear's Fright happens to be one of the most iconic settings in the entire series. So even if this game isn't the most fun in the series, it definitely left its mark on it with its visual flares. Because in the very next game, every single character would be stylized like Springtrap with all the terrors and stuff everywhere. That's all my comments about FNAF 4. Moving on to Sister Location. So, Sister Location. I may not be the biggest fan of this game, but I do really like the direction it took. For the past few games, we've been sticking to the same haunted pizzeria type settings and a bedroom, and we haven't really deviated from that at all. And Scott knew that he couldn't just do the same thing for every single game, so we had to do something new for this game. So in comes Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location, which completely shifted the series in a completely different direction. It could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on who you ask, but either way, it got people interested. Sister Location took FNAF in a lot more of a sci-fi horror route, taking place in an underground facility full of very high-tech robots. What I think is the most interesting about Sister Location is how it brought Scott back to his roots. Nearly every environment in this game looks like it could have been in the Desolate Hope. The modeling style, the texturing style, the lighting, everything is just basically the same. And I personally think that's pretty awesome that he's using those kind of environments in a FNAF game, because they do work really well. Could have been used a little better, but you know. In Sister Location's animatronics are the ones where the series had kind of just completely jumped the idea of realism out of the window, which I honestly don't really mind that much, but I know a lot of people are bothered by. Their endoskeletons are literally just a bunch of interconnected tubes and wires, which, you know, obviously that's not like physically possible in real life. I mean, it might be, and I just don't know about it, but I don't think that's something we have in real life. It's not at least somewhat believable like the FNAF 1 and 2 endoskeletons. But who cares if they aren't even trying to stay grounded? They're cool looking. Then their suits still follow the same general design philosophy with the separated joints and the sunken eyes and everything. Instead, now they have opening metal plates all over them, which is both a really smart horror concept and also a really confusing, like, why do they have that? In the Sister Location animatronics, much like the Nightmares in Springtrap, are very detailed and intricate, but they're not in the same way. Let's look at Ennard, one of the most complicated designs in the series at this point. He's a bunch of wires and eyeballs from different animatronics tangled together very intricately to make a human body. Has a similar design philosophy to Afton's corpse, weirdly, where yeah, you can register what it is, but nothing's really identifiable within it. He really is just a mass of cables. There's no actually identifiable robot parts in him, and this would later be exaggerated in his next appearance, but we'll get into that later. So basically what Sister Location did for the series' art direction going forward was take what the Desolate Hope had stylistically that FNAF didn't, and add it to FNAF. Oh, and last thing, Michael Afton's living room? I don't know what it is about it, but this is just creepy to me. I don't know, it's just super eerie. I know I kind of brushed this to the side earlier, but the same thing does apply to the FNAF 4 house. Something about Scott's style and like the old CGI style that Scott has really blends well with the 1970s house aesthetic. But yeah, I think that's basically all there is to say about Sister Location. I can't really think of much else to say. So, now let's move on to the next FNAF game, which it's the one with the most controversial character designs in the whole series. This is going to be fun to talk about. Who would have thought that one of the most important games in this series is also the weirdest? I almost hesitated to call it the weirdest, but no, I'm sure on that one.
Lemonade forever.
Now this game fully embraces the tacky CGI. Helpy looks straight out of a 90s computer game, and I love it. Now that's not to say it literally looks like it's from the 90s, because it really doesn't. It's a lot higher quality. But I just mean, he kind of captures the essence, you know? Him and Sonic Schoolhouse could be besties. In this game, it has the most characters out of any FNAF game so far, but that also means that not every character got treated equally. So, Pizzeria Simulator is a game that is basically split into two halves. The first half clearly being some kind of riff on Tycoon games, and the other half being a lot closer to what we're used to from FNAF, which, I'm gonna be honest, I have absolutely nothing interesting to say about that half, well, besides the animatronic designs, so we're mainly gonna be talking about the Pizzeria Simulator part, because The office in this game kind of is just one room, a room that happens to be the exact same texture as one of those toolboxes you find in the back of a truck. I don't quite understand the creative decision behind that one, I'm gonna be completely honest. But anyway, let's actually talk about the game. The daytime segments of Pizzeria Simulator beautifully explore the tackiness of the company behind these pizzerias, with the sketchy corporate art style shown in the intro, which are honestly really charming and also funny, like they just fit. And almost everything in the Tycoon mode, from the modeling, to the rendering, to the graphic design, to the way that the assets are displayed, it just looks very deliberately tacky, and I really love that. Which is why this is one of my favorite games in the whole series. The style of this game is just super charming and endearing. I love how low effort a ton of the stuff on the catalog is. You can just tell that Scott was having a lot of fun with this. And speaking of stuff on the catalog, this game has so many animatronics, and a lot of them are just kind of like, Prize King? Prize King? This is amazing. Sell a statue of that. $5,000. To be completely fair though, a lot of the ugly characters in this game are like deliberately meant to look ugly. Like the mediocre melodies, for example, it's literally in the name. These guys are supposed to be the weird mediocre off-brand versions of the characters, not the actual characters. They're deliberately meant to look unoriginal and boring. But then you also got like weird things in the catalog, like, alright, so the Rockstars look pretty good. I like their models, except for Chica. I don't know what it is. Rockstar Chica, she's just kind of... Here's a fun question for you, the viewer, to put in the comments and try to solve for me. Are the Rockstars made of metal, or are they made of plastic? Because I honestly can't tell. One thing I think is really apparent about all the daytime characters in Pizza Sim is that all their textures look extra fake. Like, the FNAF 1 characters make an attempt to look like they have real fur. I mean, it's obviously not there, but I mean, like, it looks good in the lighting of the game. But then the mediocre melodies, they just don't even, like, attempt at all. Almost everything in the daytime mode is just wacky looking, randomly generated, and silly. Which I think really works with the style of the old computer Tycoon games is trying to replicate. So the daytime mode in Pizza Sim, I really like it. It has a nice style and it's really fun. And you can't really fault it for not looking too great because it's not really trying to look good. Alright, so let's move on to those nighttime animatronics, because oh my goodness. So the nighttime areas in Pizzeria Simulator consist of 4 characters: Molten Freddy, Scrap Baby, Scrap Trap, or Afton, and Lefty. And all 4 of these characters' designs I see get a lot of criticism very often within the community. So let's go over them and try to figure out why they're so criticized, I guess. Starting with the first one we were introduced to and teased, Scrap Baby. The main criticism for this design is that it's very over-designed, which I can really understand. But I also don't necessarily agree that that's a bad thing about it. Because much like the environments in Sister Location bring back the style of the Desolate Hope, Scrap Baby's model brings back the style of the characters in that game. I actually called attention to this all the way at the beginning of the video. I think there was some undeniable inspiration between Scrap Baby and a lot of the robots in the Desolate Hope, which I think is the true reason why Scrap Baby's design is so complicated. Which I honestly really appreciate about it, because to an extent, she still does look like she put herself back together out of scrap. And she's clearly overcompensating with how much effort she put into reconstructing herself, which directly contrasts with the next scrap animatronic, Molten Freddy. I really like Molten Freddy's design. With Molten Freddy being Ennard, just controlled but completely by Funtime Freddy, who is a very crazy character, you can see how, with Funtime Freddy being completely in control, Ennard's completely lost his form, just being this giant heap of wires and a complete mess. And the pristine clown mask from when Baby was in control has been replaced with a cobbled together series of rusty metal plates to vaguely look like Freddy. I just think it's a really smart character design and a good evolution of the character. Which is something that I, and basically everyone else, cannot say about Springtrap's redesign. I'm not even gonna bother beating the dead horse here. Okay, everybody's talked about Scraptrap's design before, including me, so I'm not even gonna go into it. It's just like, there's nothing that needs to be said. Springtrap's corpse was pretty cartoony before, this just takes it to another level. And then we got Lefty, who is peak character design, and I will not elaborate as to why. We're just gonna go with it. Lefty is peak character design right here. This is what peak performance looks like. Then we're just gonna skip over Ultimate Custom Night because it's basically just a combination of everything we've already seen, which is cool. I really like that, but there's just nothing to talk about. I should probably also mention while we're here, I'm going to be skipping over FNAF AR Special Delivery as well. Not because FNAF AR doesn't have a unique style or anything, because it definitely does. But it's also just trying to blend in with the real world because it's AR, so I don't really think we should count it. Basically, my only thoughts on FNAF AR are character models look pretty good, not really much else visually though. And now we move on to the final chapter of the video, the Steel Wool era. Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted is the biggest leap the series has ever seen. Because all previous games have been completely 2D pre-rendered, nothing has ever been actually 3D, but this game is the first game in the series to actually be rendered in real time. And it's also the first game that's made by a company and not one person. To be fair, the team for this game was very small and Scott was still very involved in development, but you get my idea. Which wouldn't usually make the style change too much, but I haven't mentioned that this game is a VR game, which means that the environments have to be immersive and believable. In turn meaning a lot of the models had to be altered to have more detail in them. These models weren't designed to be looked at in full. They were designed to be looked at in still images from a distance. So for a game like Help Wanted, where the whole point is getting up close and personal with everything, you kinda need to increase the detail and stuff and make everything a bit more realistic. Which is exactly what Help Wanted does. To varying degrees of success. I mean, I like a lot of the models in Help Wanted, but there's also a lot of models in Help Wanted that I'm not too fond of. It's clear that a lot of things were lost in translation and a lot of details got messed up when the models were being ported and downscaled to fit in the game and also given upgraded textures to look more realistic. A lot of things were lost, like the color palettes for the FNAF 1 animatronics and the texture with their fur is basically completely gone. Or like how Toy Freddy and Toy Bonnie's teeth just kinda got lost in translation, so they had to change them, and they didn't even try for Toy Freddy's teeth, and Toy Bonnie, they put his buck teeth, like, they gave him a gap, what? And then we got arguably the most baffling one, what the heck happened to Springtrap? But then there's the most bizarre part, which some models look even the same or even better than the originals. Like how Helpy and Nightmare Fredbear of all characters got translated basically perfectly. Then there's certain characters that I think look even better than Scott's models, like the puppet for example. You can see all the paint strokes and scratches on the mask and all the dirt and grime on the fabric of the suit. It looks really good. Or how you can see like bits of rust and stuff on Mangle's endoskeleton. Overall, Help Wanted did a pretty alright job, all things considered, translating this series into 3D. And I think in a lot of areas it really succeeded at adding more detail to the universe, even if it fumbles in some areas. Overall, Help Wanted has a purpose in the series, and it serves it pretty well. It transitioned it pretty seamlessly and used familiar assets to make that transition seem a bit more natural, but still had its own flair. I also think it should be taken into consideration that this game only took 7 months to develop, so it really didn't have that much time in the oven, which is probably a big reason why a lot of the stuff in the game is kind of just off, but it's still surprising that it turned out as good as it did with that time frame. And it's also very clear that Steel Wool Studios really loves FNAF and wants to respect the IP. And their love for the series is going to be much more apparent in the next game we're going to touch on, Security Breach. So now we've reached the most recent FNAF game. As much as you can criticize its other aspects, one thing it undeniably succeeded at was its visuals. And the popularity of the animatronics in this game is really just a testament to how good their designs are. Yeah, the main four in this game aren't the scariest, but they've reached near the same popularity level as the FNAF 1 gang, which is really impressive for such new characters. And then within that, you even got genuinely great horror designs like the daycare attendant or DJ Music Man, along with tons of inspired flares based on 80s iconography, locations that would be familiar to us, and overall just making this building feel alive. The visuals of this game just very clearly show that the FNAF series is in the hands of people who love it just as much as we do. I want to leave this video on a very open-ended and positive note. Saying that, I think the series is in good hands, and I can't see anything but improvement from Steelwool. Stylistically, Security Breach is a masterpiece, and I can't wait to see what they do next. In my opinion, the Pizzaplex is everything familiar that a FNAF location should have, along with more flair that makes it super memorable. It may not be the same, but it's fresh, and I want to see more classic elements adapted into it. FNAF has been around for almost a decade, and we can't really expect it to stay the same the whole time, and it's gonna have bumps in the road, just like any series would. But artistically, I think FNAF is in a very good place, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it. So anyway, see you guys in the next video.